This one's a classic.
Sometimes there are certain classes that lead the pack in terms of meta dominance in Old School MapleStory. Knight Lord, Bishop, Corsair, Bowmaster, all of which are decent examples of a single class who outshine their peers simply by design. Knight Lord has insane mobility and single target damage. Bishop has Holy Symbol, which is pretty much all it needs to beat out the other two magicians. Corsair has the best single target DPS in the game, and Bowmaster scales better with gear at endgame than Marksman does. These classes are often more iconic than their counterparts, with this meta dominance being a strong contributor to their elevated status. When it comes to warriors, however, things are a bit different. It's no secret that for us in the West, Dark Knight is the most iconic of the three warrior classes, but it's not the strongest. It's not the most efficient choice, necessarily, and it contended in popularity for many years until eventually being overtaken by Hero in the modern day. Hero as a class is remarkably good at what it does. It has strong mobbing capabilities that are built into the core design of its fourth job skills. It has solid bossing damage with cleaving abilities and no reliance on elemental damage. Heroes make no compromises by not having to keep their HP at 50% or lower at all times in order to deal any sort of worthwhile damage. They receive everything they need up front with no hidden tricks. And let's be honest, Hero. It's a name that carries weight without too much spectacle. A hero's strength is in how little it tries to sound important, while simultaneously dominating the warrior meta for years, even when it was still in contention with Dark Knight's popularity. And in GMS specifically, there were a number of interesting meta developments that sort of changed how heroes approached the game depending on the version. Heroes are undoubtedly the most effective warrior class. But why is that the case? What was Hero like in Old School MapleStory? Before we discuss the story of Hero, though, this video is sponsored by Eidolon. More on that at the end. I'm going to be setting up my characters to work on some of their respective skills, a part of the game I haven't explored as much as I would like. Barbarian for fishing, my other warrior who's always mining, hunter for trapping, and my wizard for chopping. We'll check back in on them soon. In the beginning, heroes operated on a level similar to anyone else. When the Sleepywood Dungeon was the endgame training spot and level 60 gear was the most easily available best-in-slot gear, it was mostly a game of making sure your accuracy was high enough to hit the enemies. That is, of course, assuming you had the patience to get through that rough grind from level 1 to 60. Meet Swordloop, our hero for the day. He's jumping into MapleStory with expectations of achieving greatness, of becoming that player that everyone talks about. But he has to get his first job advancement before anything else can take root. And that journey through the first 9 levels wasn't too tough for a warrior, regardless of the path they would eventually follow. There often wasn't even anything on Maple Island that required more than the absolute minimum value of 4 accuracy. And with his primary stat being strength that allowed him to kill anything with ease, leveling just wasn't much of a concern yet. By the time he leaves Maple Island and arrives in front of Dances with Balrog, he's already destroying red snails and stumps with ease, and Swordloop finally becomes a swordman, the first job advancement of a hero. The first skill in a swordman's kit is improving HP recovery. As we learned with Dark Knights, this skill really isn't wildly useful, but it holds the keys to unlocking the next skill on the list that actually has massive long-term implications for any warrior. Improving max HP increase is arguably one of the most important skills a warrior has, and with the way it functions, increasing the amount of HP gained per level up, the sooner it's maxed, the more impactful it is long term. Interestingly, the difference between a warrior who maxes this skill before anything else, finishing it at level 15, and a theoretically different warrior who maxes it after everything else, finishing it at level 30 exactly, is about a 600 HP difference on average, which is a massive disparity. Most of the time, players won't be maxing this skill that late though, so the actual difference in most scenarios is closer to less than 100 HP, which is a small enough difference that it could be made up for by simply getting a few good rolls on the random range of HP increase that all players receive on level up. Endure is a skill we've observed a few times now, and it's nothing special to begin with. However, since it only requires 8 skill points and is given so early in the warrior's career, it actually can be utilized as a way to recover HP in extremely niche situations where you otherwise wouldn't be able to sit on a chair or stand around long enough to recover. Such as at Pig Beach, where there are no safe spots outside of the portal that leaves the area and the initial spawn point. You can hang off ropes there though, and I've done this more than a few times. It's all thanks to Endure. Iron Body is another relatively useless skill that doesn't scale very well with its flat defense bonus, and at a whopping 20 points required to max, it's often far more effective to save those points and max out the next 2 skills instead, especially in a future hero's case. One of these extremely important skills is Power Strike, up to 260% damage on a single enemy at the cost of just 12 MP. This skill can be a bit of a noob trap, actually. At face value, it seems like it would be good to get this skill early and have something you can use to hit harder, but the reality is that at lower levels, it's kind of just a potion drainer. The increase in damage it provides isn't noticeable for a while when compared with regular attacks, and it's often a much smarter move to throw points into improving max HP increase first. Once Power Strike is maxed, however, it becomes an extremely valuable tool that future heroes will be using for a very long time. The final first job swordman skill is Slash Blast. If there are any 1-point wonder skills in a swordman's kit, it's this one. Having the ability to attack 6 monsters at once puts first job warriors well ahead of just about any other class in the game, with the exception of pirates who have Somersault Kick. Though that skill is not quite as good as Slash Blast in my opinion. This skill consumes HP alongside MP, making it more expensive to use, but since warriors have such a large HP pool naturally, this increased cost tends to go unnoticed. Most warriors will have over 1000 HP by their early 20s anyway, as long as they maxed improving max HP increase first. Skill builds in first job usually aren't majorly impactful, but in the case of warriors, and magicians to a degree, it actually matters quite a bit. Because you can't max improving max HP increase with a clean, round number of skill points, it's very common to add a single point into Slash Blast before doing so. You'll end up maxing the skill at level 15 regardless of what you do, missing out on not even 10 HP total. After improving max HP increase, it's pretty much all Slash Blast and Power Strike, though the exact order isn't all that important. Slash Blast is technically the superior choice if you're not concerned about potion cost, since it enables pretty effective first job grinding. Once Slash Blast and Power Strike are maxed, 55 skill points have already been used. There are only 6 remaining points in the pool for first job, and I personally almost always put these in Endure. There is an argument to be made about possibly skipping out on a few Power Strike or Slash Blast points in favor of Iron Body, but I've never entertained this idea personally, and I've been playing Warriors my whole life, so that means you have to agree with my skill build opinions. Speaking of Slash Blast's insanely effective mobbing capabilities, warriors tend to have a fairly easy time in first job, if they're funded. One of the most understated aspects of playing a warrior is how often they're hit by enemies. They have to stay within close proximity. They don't have innate avoidability. They simply have their massive HP pools and heavily defensive armor to mitigate the nearly non-stop onslaught of incoming damage. How this manifests is often similarly understated in warriors kind of struggling to build wealth in first job. It's not uncommon at all to find warriors training on monsters they've already outgrown simply because of accuracy demands and potion costs in the early days. Eventually, this stops being as much of an issue, but in first job it's noticeable if you're not careful with picking training spots. Otherwise, first job for a swordman looks very similar to other classes. The only real difference is that they don't necessarily thrive on larger maps where ranged attackers and magicians would easily dominate. In my day, I even utilized the bubblings at the end of Shumi's jump quest as a staple training spot given their density. And density is usually the answer. Wild boars are another example of this. They move quickly and group up often. Once the necessary accuracy is acquired, wild boars can last a future hero quite a long time, even reaching into the early second job training meta. After many hours at wild boars, hopefully acquiring an above-average Lionheart sword for future use in the process, Sword Loop is ready to finally commit to the path of a hero, but there are still a few more steps required to reach that point, the first of which is job advancing to Fighter. The first two skills in a fighter's kit are Sword and Axe Mastery. Both give accuracy and increase minimum damage when equipped with the corresponding weapon. Fighter is the only class in the game who uses axes in any official capacity, and there's quite a lot to discuss regarding that weapon type. As we know, all warriors lean very heavily on Mastery's accuracy increase, as it pretty significantly relieves what would otherwise need to be acquired through gear or valuable stats. Next up are Final Attack Sword and Axe, another instance of two separate skills that are identical outside of applying to different types of weapons. Just like every other Final Attack skill we've discussed, this skill procs after using Slash Blast or Power Strike at a set chance, and it locks your character into an animation while it executes that attack. The final skill duo for a fighter is Sword and Axe Booster. These skills increase attack speed for up to 200 seconds and are only applicable to the corresponding weapon type. Wildly important skill here, especially for a class who uses such slow weapons. The first buff outside of Iron Body, and the only party buff heroes ever receive that isn't a common skill, is Rage. At max level, this skill gives plus 12 weapon attack, which is a very welcome buff. Interestingly, it also lowers weapon defense, as though this is some sort of balancing act meant to make the skill feel more like a trade-off to use. The issue is the plus 12 weapon attack in exchange for minus 12 weapon defense is not even close to equal in terms of impact. 12 weapon defense is practically nothing. In practice, you would maybe take 8 to 10 less damage from a hit. And 12 weapon attack is a pair of work gloves that costs hundreds of millions of mesos. There's really not much more to say about Rage. It's pretty good, but because it doesn't stack with any other attack buffs besides Echo, it was easily replaced by NLC's Warrior Elixirs once those came out. The final fighter skill is Power Guard, and this is an interesting one. Not only does this skill reflect damage taken, enabling HP warriors and opening the door to insane leeching methods, but it also reduces damage taken up front. While the damage reflected isn't strictly valuable in most scenarios, it's just not enough damage to matter, that damage reduction is absolutely worth the cost of entry of 30 skill points. It's just annoying that it has to be recast every 90 seconds. Fighters actually have one of the most approachable skill builds in the game, retaining a whopping 33 skill points after maxing their core skills. This is not quite enough to go hybrid, and even if you were to pursue that path and compromise by not maxing either of the booster skills, you'd still find it mostly pointless to do so, as both weapon types have access to all of the exact same skills, though it can be done if so desired. Between choosing either swords or axes and maxing their respective mastery and booster skills, that only leaves Rage and Power Guard as the two remaining skills to max. That leaves a lot of extra points that could be added to Iron Body or another skill. As is the case with Spearmen and Pages, as we'll discuss later, Final Attack retains the exact same attributes for fighters, an overall increase in single target DPS, and a noticeable drop in mobbing damage. This is because of Final Attack's absolutely ridiculous design of not applying the 250% damage multiplier to every monster hit, but instead applying it as a total across the number of monsters hit. What's worse is that it's not even a linear distribution. It's very common to see warriors with Final Attack hitting single-digit damage on the 6th enemy, even if they're regularly capable of hitting over 1k normally. With that being said, let's talk about an argument in favor of Final Attack. The potential upside of Final Attack manifests primarily in one specific meta, the Deep Aqua Road Gobi training meta. Because of skills that Sword Loop will receive in 3rd Job, Slash Blast actually has very little impact when training on this map. With the bombing fish houses being the bulk of the Gobi HP, this means that single target attacks are kind of king here. Because of this, if Gobis are the best training spot for most of 3rd Job, which they often are depending on the version, Final Attack is actually not a terrible pick. However, its negative impact on Slash Blast will be felt throughout 2nd Job and most of 3rd Job, but it will allow Crusaders to very easily dominate one of the historically best training spots in the game. They don't really need this extra boost, but hey, that's an argument for it, I guess. It's hard to make a good argument in favor of Final Attack. I'm doing the best I can. At this point in progression, weapon choice begins to matter because it's becoming slightly more set in stone, more permanent with the additions of Mastery and Booster. Sword Loop, true to his name, will be sticking with swords. But what's the difference here? Unlike Dark Knights, whose polearms and spears both served a practical purpose, up until a certain point, both heroes and paladins have to make a decision and stick to it, because there's no predetermined use case for all of their weapon types, and not enough of a cushion in terms of skill points to allow them to easily build hybrid. Swords are by far the most common, and for good reason. While they don't possess a higher damage multiplier, theirs is stable and unchanging, whereas an axe will use different damage calculations based on whether it's swung or stabbed, which is randomly chosen at a 60-40 ratio when attacking. In 4th Job, there's a skill that will always execute one stab and one slash, so by choosing Axe, the hero finds exposure to both the high axe multiplier of swinging and the low axe multiplier of stabbing, whereas a sword will always use the same multiplier. This isn't necessarily bad conceptually, but the issue simply comes down to the fact that axes were undertuned, and with a fair 50-50 spread of stabs and swings, which heroes will always have, axes will, without fail, come out below an equivalent sword's rock-solid stable multiplier. The obvious answer here would be to balance them so that the average multiplier with this 50-50 spread would equal the sword's unchanging multiplier, or be slightly higher than it. Maybe even just match it closer, but they never did that. Axes just always got the short stick. Before 4th Job, the only difference is attack speed, really. Axes are often slower than their sword counterparts, though this is not a universal truth of axes. Sometimes they're the exact same speed. Generally speaking though, by the time the player has committed to either axes or swords, they're locked in, and axe heroes are infinitely cooler than sword heroes, let's be honest. But since Sword Loop insisted on using swords, let's talk about some of those. The first and most obvious choice for an early second job fighter is the Lionheart Sword. A level 35 two-handed sword that has the added bonus of being 5 attack speed rather than the usual 6. This makes up a good chunk of its lack of damage compared to higher level choices, and thus it can be used for quite a long time. Skipping over the level 40 Zard and jumping straight into the iconic Lion's Fang, or its reskinned variant that's also 5 attack speed, the Tiger's Fang. An NLC exclusive weapon, by the way, that region that never stops delivering overpowered content. Beyond that, there's the legendary Japanese map sword that was far more commonly used than either the Lion's Fang or Tiger's Fang, strictly because it was a drop from leprechauns, making it more accessible. You know, those Masteria enemies who had a wicked valuable drop pool and were brain dead easy to farm. After that, you had the 6 attack speed Sparta, which is cool, but always looked like a toy to me. It's hard to take it seriously with its rubber blade. There was the Maple Soul Rowan, which was usually the last sword people would use until endgame because of its insanely busted 35 accuracy increase. That more than made up for the weapon attack you would lose by not switching to something like the Daiwa sword or the Doombringer. Two-handed swords are up there in terms of weapon type that consistently has the best design, and this is observable as early as level 35. That Lionheart sword design is just so simple and satisfying. If you wanted to use one-handed swords, the options were abundant, and there were more choices for fun weapons. Maple Lights, Gladius, Maple Sword, the legendary Red Whip, the Flaming Katana, the Yellow Umbrella, which had less weapon attack than equal level one-handed swords, making it a better choice for magicians. There was the Trouse, the Glowing Whip, the Maple Soul Singer, the Nameless Sword and Onyx Blade, the Jeweled Katar, the second-tier Lunchbox, the Maple Glory Sword, the NLC exclusive Astral Blade, and the most commonly used and possibly the most recognizable one-handed sword in this level range, the Red Katana. And this doesn't even cover the axes, of which there are a few really cool unique options like the Blue Counter, Hawkhead, Sabertooth, Maple Demon Axe, Chrono, and the NLC exclusive Crescent Moon. As you can see, fighters had tons of choices for weapons, and we didn't even cover all of them on this list. One of the best sources of EXP for any warrior in the mid to late 40s is Carnival PQ, the cool version where you invite a level 30 into your party and then enter a 2v2 with your buddy on the other team before you guys both kick your low-level party members so you can both solo the mobs and get all of the XP. This is something I personally did a lot as a spearman back in the day, and you can find a good number of videos of warriors absolutely demolishing Carnival PQ entirely on their own. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be viable for very long, because by level 51, it was back to regular training methods, and doing the cool version of Carnival PQ made level 51 downright easy to acquire. Outside of party questing, which was pretty decent for warriors who were often still at a point where they weren't making tons of mesos, accuracy dictated training spot. Forest of Golem is obviously one of the most iconic warrior maps and a location that could last well into the 60s, possibly even all the way beyond third job depending on game version. Really, training a second job warrior is a lot like training a first job warrior, except now you're bound to one weapon type and you attack a little faster. It's a slow process, and it certainly won't hold your hand. You'll be spamming Slash Blast on Hectors and Golems well into the early 70s. That is, of course, assuming Ghost Ship doesn't exist, and you're not stuck listening to that music for hours on end. You know what doesn't suck though? Power Guard. This skill is pretty crazy. It inherently saves Mesos by reducing damage taken, and that alone separates it from the rest of the pack. Outside of small increases here and there between like Iron Body or Magician's Magic Guard, there are very few early game damage reduction skills, and even fewer that operate off of percentage calculations. And let's not forget its utility for HP warriors. Being able to solo Bigfoot at level 41 is literally impossible for anyone who's not a fighter or a page with Power Guard. Third Job acts as a beacon of hope for most players. It's a source of power and a time of excitement after a long, tough grind. Our future hero just reached level 70 and is now allowed to become a Crusader. So, what lies on the other side of that grind for Sword Loop? Well, first up is improving MP recovery. Recover slightly more MP every 10 seconds. Not impactful, really, and a far cry from the extremely valuable element resistance that Dragon Knights get. Alright, what's next? Shield Mastery doubles the defense of whatever shield is equipped, so this skill is really only viable for one-handed weapon users. For reference and context, the highest defense shield in the game before Big Bang was the elusive VIP Warrior Shield at 150 defense. This is 300 total with Shield Mastery, which is actually not a bad amount of bonus defense, to be honest. The issue arises when you learn that the most viable shield options were the 10-slot Maple Shields, meaning 3 sacrificed slots for extra base defense, or losing out on what can be considered an okay defense bonus by using a lower level shield. Originally, this skill didn't even calculate the bonus defense based off of a percentage of the shield's defense. It was just a flat increase, which was far less useful somehow. All of this is to say, most Crusaders kinda skipped this one. It just didn't have enough of an impact. Now we're getting somewhere. Combo Attack. This is a buff skill that, while active, allows any attacking skill to add a combo orb to the total combo count when attacking enemies. Up to 5 orbs can be active at once, and each orb increases weapon attack slightly up to a maximum of plus 220%. Yes, 220%. While combo attack to an outsider may just appear to be a flashy, weird particle effect, it's actually one of the biggest damage increases a Crusader will ever receive. During the early days, recasting this buff would destroy all 5 orbs, which is more annoying than anything else. However, combo attack was eventually converted into a toggle rather than being a buff, but this took place like way later, like way after Big Bang. The next piece of the puzzle is Panic. Whether it's the sword or axe variant, the skills are identical. They both consume all 5 combo orbs to deal 350% damage with 90% dark element. This is a pretty large multiplier for a skill, and while it only hits one enemy, this skill certainly has its place in a third job meta. It's not as flashy as some other big third job skills, but it hits just as hard, if not harder. Then there's Coma, the mobbing equivalent of Panic. It too consumes all 5 orbs and deals only 200% damage rather than the massive 350% of Panic. And unlike Final Attack, it actually deals the full 200% on every individual enemy hit. It also stuns at a 90% chance, which is a nice bonus, but not often a life-saving feature of this skill for a class as tanky and deadly as Crusader. Because Coma hits up to 6 enemies and deals 70% more damage than Slash Blast, this is where the hidden dominance of Gobi Destruction really shines. With Gobis being such an insanely valuable monster throughout all of Third Job in terms of both EXP and Mesos, this might seem like a small advantage, but it's actually pretty massively impactful overall. Dragon Knights need to have both Crusher and Dragon Fury to do well at Gobies, and they'll be compromising either single target damage by using polearms, or mobbing damage by using spears. Crusaders don't have to make that compromise, and this is a recurring theme we'll see throughout the rest of their career. No compromises. Let's not pretend every skill is valuable though. Armor Crash in its vanilla form only debuffs one specific niche monster buff that you won't often find even has an impact on the game really. Monster buffs in Old School MapleStory were undertuned in a lot of cases, and physical defense up is one of these undertuned buffs. Even mobs who have it don't see a noticeable difference in damage taken by casting it, and the stronger the player is, the less that even matters to begin with. This is one of the many third job skills that was designed very much for the era of like Yeti and Pepe farming and doesn't really scale beyond that. Finally, there's Shout, a cool AoE attack that stuns at up to a 95% success rate for 10 seconds. It's slow to cast, doesn't hit super hard, and its range is nothing to write home about. It's cool that you can summon a tiger though. Some players, depending on the version of the game, will tell you that there's only one skill to max on a Crusader: combo attack. Literally nothing else matters. And they're kind of right. While this may be a weird case of a job advancement that could genuinely get by with maxing only one skill, it also speaks to the design of Crusader. A class that doesn't really rely on anything outside of the passive damage increase of combo attack. Panic and Coma, while they're actually very useful, can theoretically be skipped as they're not massively impactful attacking skills and mostly function as stronger versions of Power Strike and Slash Blast, which the player already has. Your average Crusader will usually opt to pick up these skills simply because there's not much more that's worth grabbing and they're fun to use, but by fourth job they become semi-irrelevant anyway. Crusader is a very weird class in this regard. To my knowledge, there's no other job advancement in the entire game where you could genuinely make a strong, compelling argument that they only need one of the skills they unlock. Because of this lack of necessary skills in their kit, it is possible to build a hybrid Crusader who has reasonable access to using either swords or axes. Like I mentioned before though, building a hybrid Dragon Knight was practical. It unlocked access to the best versions of both Crusher and Dragon Fury, but Crusaders don't need to make this compromise, so building a hybrid Crusader is mostly a novelty. There's not as much of a tangible benefit to doing so, but it can be done. Now, training as a Crusader. Where will Swordloop find himself throughout these grueling 50 levels? Well, if his accuracy allows, Wolf Spiders are always a top pick for any melee class. Fast-moving, favorable map layout, and they hit hard, which greatly discourages ranged attackers from utilizing them, freeing up valuable channel slots. Those Ilby drops are a nice addition too. Really though, the sooner they can get to Deep Sea Gorge 2, the better. While the XP definitely falls off beyond level 100 or so, it's not unheard of for people to train here all the way to 120, though eventually moving to something like Hime's or Petrie's or Nudi's around the late 90s to early 100s is far more efficient. Crusader doesn't only enjoy simplicity in skill builds, they also enjoy a relatively simple existence in third job, as long as they're willing to accept the deal that Power Strike and Slash Blast will still be their primary tools for another 50 levels. It's a hard deal to make for most people, but it's one that will pay off heavily in fourth job. Also worth noting, priests will usually prefer to train with Dragon Knights because of Hyper Body, but it's really not uncommon for them to buddy up with Crusaders, so there's not that much worry in that regard, unless everybody's trying to play the meta super optimally. The moment is finally here. Sword Loop has survived through the Power Strike and Slash Blast grind long enough to find himself sitting in front of Harmonia, ready for his 4th job advancement. Hero receives all of the common Warrior 4th job skills, including Monster Magnet, Power Stance, Achilles, and Rush. The first unique skill given to them is Advanced Combo Attack. This is a direct upgrade to 3rd job's combo attack, providing a flat plus 30 damage increase and adding 5 additional combo orbs. It also gives a passive 60% chance to add 2 combo orbs per attack rather than just 1. It's a relatively simple skill, but remarkably important for a hero's damage output. The next skill is a bit more niche and lesser known. Guardian is an interesting case of a skill that is shared by only 2 of the 3 classes in a job branch, with Paladins being the other class with access to this skill. Dark Knights just don't get it. At max level, when equipped with a shield, it gives a passive 15% chance to completely block an attack. It plays this super cool little animation, and since it works against any type of attack, it's actually a solid potion saving skill for those one-handed users, you know, to help them make back the cost of that expensive weapon attack shield. It also stuns monsters who attack with melee. Guardian is a very cool skill that unfortunately doesn't see enough use due to it being locked behind shield usage. Now we reach what can be considered a contender for outright best skill in the game: Brandish. A hero's new primary attack that replaces both Power Strike and Slash Blast, as it possesses qualities of both. It hits 260% damage twice on up to 3 enemies, making it an extraordinarily powerful tool that's absolutely worth the grind. For the rest of a hero's career, they can very easily use Brandish exclusively without issue, though I do believe Panic and/or Coma might have a small place in the kit. This is one of those cases where my inexperience with Hero comes into play. I actually don't know if they continue to use Panic or Coma after receiving Brandish. The last unique skill for heroes is Enrage, which is a direct upgrade to Rage. Kind of. It gives plus 26 weapon attack for 240 seconds, but it has one massive drawback: a 10-minute cooldown. It also requires all 10 combo orbs to cast, but that's not really that big of a cost to pay for such a large damage increase. Unfortunately, this skill is easily replaced with solid weapon attack potions like Heartstoppers or Onyx Apples, which provide far more bonus damage and don't stack with Enrage. This skill is a bit of a missed opportunity. At the very least, it should have come without a cooldown. Unfortunately for heroes, Brandish 30 is locked behind Papulatus, and Pink Bean, surprisingly. This locks out the ability to hit 3 enemies until the hero can get their hands on one of these books, but honestly that's kind of a small price to pay. Night Lords, for example, have to deal with Zachem in order to even have access to Triple Throw to begin with, but this doesn't make Brandish 30 any less annoying to acquire. Outside of accessibility of books, Brandish is by far the most important first skill to max, followed by Advanced Combo Attack, a skill book that is also locked behind Zachem, of course. They really didn't make it easy on heroes to make that leap into 4th job. It takes a good bit of time, but it's totally worth it in the end. After these skills are maxed, it's a matter of maxing Power Stance, Maple Warrior, Rush, and Achilles. Add Guardian to that list if you're using a shield. There are more than 40 leftover points in 4th job, even if the player chooses to max Guardian, and previous job advancements had so many excess skill points that there's really no concern of ever missing out on any skill you want when playing hero. Now, let's talk Brandish, an absolutely iconic, legendary, satisfying, and flashy skill that serves as the reward for the long road to 120. It's fast, strong, multi-purpose, but it does have one quirk that I mentioned earlier. Since Brandish hits 2 lines, they decided it would be a good idea to register the 2 hits as different types of attacks. In this case, 1 swing and 1 stab. For sword users, this doesn't really matter, but this quirk is what makes axes weaker on average, since the hero is now operating with a fixed 50-50 swing to stab ratio, rather than the 60-40 ratio that they had prior to this. The 60-40 ratio tuned the axes to be a bit more favorable, but unfortunately there's no argument for raw numbers once Brandish is introduced. Axes, as much as I love them, will always be objectively inferior to swords. Of course, it's important to remember that this difference is not necessarily observable throughout the overwhelming majority of a hero's career until they've created perfect weapons at least, and so many factors go into DPS, including an element of skill and experience, that I personally believe that axe enthusiasts shouldn't be discouraged. They're just as viable as swords and possess far more cool factor. The Brandish versus Crusher with Berserk comparison is interesting and probably worth talking about. Dark Knights using Crusher with max Berserk will have comparable damage to max level Brandish. The difference will often come down to gear and level more than class difference. However, it's important to remember that Dark Knights, in order to achieve this comparable damage, must keep their HP below 50% at all times, which effectively limits their HP pool to just 15,000 at most, and requires more active gameplay. A hero can simply spam Brandish and easily compete with a Dark Knight, and this is another example of heroes' crazy warrior dominance. They can have full access to their HP pool, and they can hug bishops without any concern of ever losing their DPS. Alright, let's check in on my Eidolon characters. There's definitely more for me to do here with regards to skills, but since it happens mostly passively, it's pretty satisfying to just come back and grab your idol gains, honestly. I found this game on Steam a while ago now, and I've been enjoying its progression quite a bit. There's a good number of skills to level which can be done passively, as we've seen. The mix of idle game and MMO elements make it feel like an actually enjoyable experience as well. I've been playing both idle games and MMOs for a long time. They're 2 of my favorite genres, so a game that combines the best aspects of them is perfect. Eidolon doesn't demand as much of my time as other MMOs, and that's very valuable to me these days as a busy YouTuber. I have to wake up before noon sometimes. Eidolon is available on both iOS and Steam, so I can hop in-game on my phone to check up on things, and whenever I'm at my computer, I can launch the game through Steam and my account is seamlessly saved to the cloud, which is super convenient. You can play Eidolon for free on Steam using the links posted in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks again to Eidolon for sponsoring this video. It's around this point in progression that heroes will need to begin seriously considering an endgame weapon, and there are so many potential options for this class. People constantly talk about the differences between one-handed and two-handed weapons, but the why is usually skipped over entirely or reduced to, you'd have to scroll a perfect shield for one-handed to be viable. This is an easily digestible answer, sure, but what goes into this exactly? Essentially, what we're looking at with this discussion of one-handed weapons versus two-handed weapons, whether we're discussing swords or axes, are nuanced differences that come down to a few variables. Attack speed, including speed infusion, one-handed versus two-handed weapon multipliers, yes, these are different than sword and axe weapon multipliers, total weapon attack, including attack buffs, cost and accessibility, and niche boss use cases, such as Bigfoot soloing. The endgame weapon options pre-Big Bang for a future hero are actually massively abundant. There were basically 5 good options back in the day. The Red Katana, the Sparta, the Stonetooth Sword, and their level 110 dragon equivalents. Go a little further towards the end of the pre-Big Bang era, and you can include timeless weapons on that list. The red katana and Sparta are nearly equivalent in damage output. Despite having a very large difference in weapon attack, the extra attack speed from the red katana meant that a crusader could reach the attack speed cap of 2 with booster alone, which is usually unheard of for warriors who don't have speed infusion available. The red katana is a double-edged sword though, because it's the rarest of the endgame weapon choices, only being dropped by monsters most people weren't really training on back in the day. But even then, the red katana is not a guaranteed safe bet. The issue arises with the introduction of speed infusion actually, as you'll basically be capping yourself by sticking to a weapon that already reaches the attack speed cap without speed infusion, when you could instead use something slower and get that extra bonus attack speed when speed infusion is available. Without speed infusion's existence though, the red katana was basically the best one-handed sword in the game. Most people weren't willing to make the trade-off of lost potential damage and bossing though, so red katanas, as good as they actually are, often lost out to the Sparta. The Sparta, which shares a name with the level 60 two-handed toy, is usually the go-to option for a one-handed sword user. It dropped from Skelligons, Chief Memory Guardians, Burks, Manon, Leviathan, and Horntail. You could actually remove the last 5 monsters from its drop pool, and it would still be one of the most abundant weapons in the game, simply due to the popularity of Skellies. Finding a decent one was not difficult at all, and this greatly offset the cost of scrolling a shield. With only 5 attack speed, it was still benefiting from speed infusion, making it a better long-term investment for bossing. Really though, you were simply held back by the fact that you would have had to have scrolled a shield with this in order to have a chance to match two-handed swords. Even then, the higher damage multiplier on a two-handed weapon meant that it scaled better with weapon attack. So if you were planning on using Onyx apples, you were already hindering yourself by going one-handed. The final boss of one-handed swords was the level 110 Dragon Carabella. 5 attack speed, higher damage, but harder to come by since it required either crafting or a direct drop from Horntail. If you were committed to one-handed swords, this was the best you could do. The lunchbox is an honorable mention as well, as it required level 120 and had slightly higher base damage compared to the Dragon Carabella, but accessibility was a massive issue for this weapon as it could not be traded. So you had better have gotten one on your hero when it was available, and also use those one-handed GM scrolls from Masteria if you wanted to make it worthwhile. There's still one more issue with one-handed swords though, and that comes down to attack speed once again. Pinning Bigfoot properly on a hero requires a weapon with 4 attack speed exactly, and almost all of these swords lack the ability to reach that exact value. So you'd have to deal with working around his invincibility frames unless you were rocking a red katana. One of the more interesting GMS-specific developments involves the Crimsonwood Keep exchange quest. Unlocked after completing a series of quests for the Raven Ninja Clan, one of the reward pools contained an item that was never meant to be obtainable by players, and this had a direct impact on the one-handed sword meta for both heroes and paladins. Turning in 50 Night Shadow badges gave a number of regular rewards, including the Raven's Wing two-handed sword, which we'll discuss soon. Among these rewards was the GM 100% one-handed sword attack scroll. The term GM scroll is a colloquialism that refers to what are presumably scrolls only meant to be obtained and used by GMs. They have a hard-coded 100% success rate and give the stats of scrolls that often only have a 10% success rate. This design makes no sense from a security standpoint, just the most basic security 101. Why on earth would they even include these in the public files to begin with, much less making them tradable or having their item IDs be so similar to regular scrolls that they could mistakenly replace the real 10% scroll without anyone even noticing. This would eventually be fixed after a very long time, though GM scrolls managed to find their way into the game multiple times over the years. which is probably not all that surprising when you consider how loosely Nexon was playing with them in the file structure of the game to begin with. It created a bizarre GMS-exclusive meta for a while, where perfect one-handed swords became significantly easier to acquire. Ironically, this offset the expensive and random nature of a one-handed build by removing one of the variables. Just go farm a ton of these items and get your hands on 7 GM scrolls for a perfect one-handed sword. I know it sounds crazy, but it was by far the easiest way to acquire one. Of course, that did nothing for the shield scrolling meta. Scrolls for shields were mad expensive, and most players wanted access to the 10-slot shields, which were anniversary event items, meaning a lack of accessibility. It was possible to make do with any 7-slot shield, but you'd be losing out on up to 9 weapon attack and 6 strength potentially without these 3 extra slots, and that was a big deal. You had to somehow not only scroll a really good weapon, which already took 7 slots, but then you had to scroll a really good shield as well, taking up another 10 slots. While two-handed users were scrolling their 7-slot items, one-handed users were forced to scroll 17 slots instead for less damage potential overall, all other aspects being equal. The trade-off just wasn't worth it for most players if they didn't make use of the GM scrolls, and that's still true to this day with the Terminus Defender, though I don't think GM scrolls are in circulation anymore. Where the real damage output lives is in the two-handed sword meta. No damage spread between swinging and stabbing, no awkward attack speed values, and no worrying about 10 extra slots on a shield. There were only a few options for this really, and they're all fascinating. The Stone-Tooth Sword, dropped by Black Crow and also available from the New Leaf City Gachapon, is a 5 attack speed sword with solid damage that has one bizarre requirement: 120 dex. This is one of the only viable endgame weapons for any warrior that had a dex requirement, and it rewrote the entire playbook for heroes. No longer was the move simply getting the accuracy required to hit mobs, it was now a game of trying to reach that coveted 120 dex value without compromising damage. Like they're playing Nightlord or something. This was relatively easily acquired, but as time went on, it became less and less desirable of a weapon choice outside of its style points. There was another two-handed sword that could be utilized for endgame, another item exclusively available from Crimsonwood Forest. The Raven's Wing is a reward in the same reward pool as the one-handed sword GM scroll that could be upgraded to a Night Raven's Wing. It was a solid endgame option, being the other endgame sword that had a dex requirement, but it wasn't utilized very often by two-handed sword users. Its 5 attack speed was awkward, which is a problem the Stone-Tooth Sword also had, but the Night Raven's Wing was much harder to come by. It could only be obtained through CWK Exchange Quest, requiring ingredients also used in the crafting of Balanced Fury throwing stars. It was an expensive weapon, and most people simply weren't crafting them. It made more sense to sell off the black crystals and just find a Stone-Tooth Sword. The Night Raven's Wing also had 5 less attack. This difference in attack is completely offset by its dex requirement being 25 points lower, putting it just about on par with an average clean Stone-Tooth Sword, which had the added bonus of going all the way up to like 105 attack clean, clearing the Night Raven's Wing in terms of damage output. Both the Stone-Tooth Sword and the Night Raven's Wing were absolutely unequivocally viable throughout the remainder of a hero's career if they were scrolled well, even up to level 200 and beyond, even with their dex requirements. But there was still one step above this that a good number of heroes would eventually graduate to. The Dragon Claymore might be the greatest hero weapon to ever exist, hitting all the major points required. 6 attack speed, meaning you could self-buff down to 4 attack speed and spam Brandish on Bigfoot without worry. You also received the full attack speed bonus from Speed Infusion, meaning you'd never be wasting potential DPS. And you'd have access to the strongest weapon multiplier available. one that scaled extraordinarily well with weapon attack buffs like Heartstoppers and Onyx Apples. This is the weapon most heroes who want true optimization and no compromises aim for, and hero is all about dominance without compromise, right? Later on in the game's life, towards the end of the Big Bang era, the timeless weapons were released, which dropped from Pink Bean. In every instance for swords, these were direct upgrades to their categorical counterparts. They were simply stronger without any downsides, other than accessibility and the process of leveling them for stats. A perfectly good, valuable, timeless Nibelheim could be ruined because of bad attack rolls on item level up. Cool system, Nexon. I don't really want to restate what's already been said about swords, but I do want to highlight some of the viable endgame axes, because axe heroes are a class worth protecting. Every mainline one-handed axe after the level 40 blue counter had 6 attack speed, so this made them viable for Bigfoot pinning, which is a bonus for sure. This also means that one-handed axe users weren't restricted to a lower level weapon with faster attack speed and could jump straight to the dragon axe or timeless bardiche without any concern. Two-handed axe users weren't quite as lucky. The level 100 Tavar and the level 110 Dragon Battle Axe both had 7 attack speed, whereas the level 90 Colonian Axe had the expected 6. Luckily for our brave axe brethren, the timeless Tabarzan was released with 6 attack speed, making it the final best-in-slot option, one of the rare cases where a timeless weapon actually outperformed its lower-level counterparts beyond simply having more attack power. Shields were the same, scrolling was the same, albeit a lot cheaper, and axe users enjoyed the privilege of being asked, "Why are you using axes?" throughout their entire career. Hero is one of those classes that just always does well. While they're not exactly the kings of single-target DPS, they're still more than viable in most content. They're easy to HP watch with their naturally high HP pool and HP growth. They're easy to pick up and viscerally enjoyable to play. Hero is a class that is enjoyed by everyone, from casual newcomers all the way to extreme veterans who are soloing Horntail with Onyx Apples. On the hierarchy of popularity, it's usually Nightlord followed by Hero, if we exclude Bishop, who doesn't really count. And while I tend to view the class as a relatively safe choice, it's undeniable how effective it is at everything, really. I'd say that for whatever reason, warriors are often the most respected players in the game. Back in the day, when knowledge of the meta was relatively minimal and players couldn't reach third job with ease, both Crusaders and Dragon Knights dominated the rankings and captured the hearts of players, something that is evident to this day given the extraordinarily dedicated fanbase of hero mains. At some point after the Paladin rush of early Big Bang, heroes overtook other warriors by every measurable metric: damage output, popularity, as well as retaining their status of being easily approachable. This shift happened slowly over time, and heroes in the modern day are still exceptionally popular, no matter where the meta shifts. For all of the endgame weapons that heroes had access to, the Stone-Tooth Sword is by far the most iconic of them all. Nothing else really even touches its legacy. It's still obtainable today, as far as I know, and people went to great lengths to reach that 120 dex to be able to equip it. The nice thing is that most items on a warrior would be scrolled for dex anyway, so reaching that threshold was often little more than incidental. It sounds like a lofty goal on paper, but that's clearly never stopped it from becoming one of the most popular weapons in the game. The playstyle of hero itself doesn't vary all that much. They're given 2 weapon paths, which is more than most classes get, and there are even a variety of endgame weapon choices that are nearly interchangeable without too much loss in damage output. It pretty much comes down to player preference and circumstance. Find and scroll an exceptional red katana? Sounds like you have your endgame weapon. Want the best damage output with no compromises whatsoever? Sounds like you're aiming for a Dragon Claymore or Timeless Nibelheim. Even if they choose to wield an axe, Hero is still one of the best class picks, a class whose performance is never questioned, as their role is clear and defined. They don't find themselves under the scrutiny a paladin has to endure, or being replaced by meta chasers running hyper body buff mules. If melee damage is important, Hero is pretty much always at the top of that list. And that's what makes it one of the best classes in Old School MapleStory.